All right. It's 3:30. Should be ready to go. And if this comes in, I'll close it. Takes a minute. Oh, there we go. Okay. So today we're going to do kick drums. There's a lot of ways to make a kick drum in Ableton Live. Well, we're not going to make one, actually. We're just going to take pre-selected samples, which is what I recommend most people do. It's by far the easiest way. There's too many things to do in music production to always be making your own kick drums. There's plenty of exceptions to that. I've had friends who made some badass kick drums. I've made a couple of badass kick drums, but they usually are limited in terms of the type of kick drum they are, like 808s or really huge trance kicks. That's the most common kind of kick sound you're going to get when you make your own. So here's a couple of ways to get your kick drum going in a track. I'm just going to keep it simple today and assume we're going to do a 4/4, 4 on the floor kick beat, like for trance or house or any of that kind of stuff. So, this is all right. So the first way we can do it is on an audio track. So this kick track right here is an audio track, which I made by just hitting Control T. There's a new audio. Can do it again. Kick. Control R to rename it. Renamed it to kick. Delete this old one. So here I'll even name it kick audio, so you know it's an audio track. So if you want to make an audio track, you hit Control T. If you want to make a MIDI track, you hit Control Shift T, like this. This mic track is here just so that you guys can all hear me. I wouldn't normally have this when I'm making a song. But I'm not trying to do a complex out audio routing right now. So it's all coming through Ableton. So everything you're hearing is through Ableton, and that's why my mic is in Ableton. So if we're doing a kick on an audio track, you basically are just dragging a sample directly in. And I'm using kicks that come, which are really good. Dubstep. Kick ones. And every time you sample these kicks, they're going to come through at max volume, which is really annoying. So just beware. And if that's really loud, that's why. It's just the way their sampling thing works. I don't know if there's a way to fix that or change it. Anyways, so if it's a 4 on the floor kick drum, you want it to hit on every quarter note beat. And so for this measure, this is measure 9, so 9, 9.2, 9.3, 9.4. So it's going to have to hit on all those. If I right click on the track, I can change the grid to quarter notes and then just lay the sample on each of the quarter notes. So I can drag it all out like that. I can also just copy and paste. Paste. Also use duplicate, which is my favorite. Highlight. You want to make sure if you're it, so it goes like that, whereas opposed to if I did it like this, you don't want that. So highlight all of them, pop over like that, boom. Got 4 on the floor kick drum for as long as I copy it over. So this is one way to do it, and it's a decent way to do it. Oh, you probably want to unwarp. Oh, no, it's not warped. Okay, good. Hold on. Interesting. All right, so that's good that this is off in this instance. But anyways, I'm going to turn the metronome on so you can hear that it's in time. That's really fast. Let's slow it down. Not super loud. So this is pretty much maxed out as it is. You can turn it down in the sample itself, but if you do that for one sample, you have to do it for all of them. You can do it all at the same time by highlighting, double clicking, and just making it quieter, which I'm actually going to do because I really like to keep the source at the best volume instead of adjusting for it later. And then you can also just do the fader on here or switch to mixer mode and edit the fader on here. Get it where you want. So when it comes to, actually, let's do another way of putting kick drums in. So the way I usually put kick drums in is with the impulse. And you can do this with the sampler as well, but the impulse gives you the option to layer kick drums. So you can take this kick. I forgot I don't like these. I want to use what I was using before. This is another. What was I using? Shit. Free kicks. And okay, I can double click on this. Free kicks, house kick 2. Okay. Sorry, I just want to keep the kicks consistent. So I'm going to drag this into the impulse here. Now, the impulse has different ways of triggering samples. There's trigger, which is going to have a different sound than gate. And there's mode A and mode B. And those are all going to have slightly different sounds of kind of how the sound hits, the transient, the very first part of the sound, and sometimes the end part of the sound, or how it fades off or cuts off, which is also edited through things like start and stretch and velocity and whatever. And on the simpler, there's the ASDR, the attack, sustain, decay, release. Those are all ways to affect how the sound's hitting or how the sample's hitting. In this case, I usually just stick with gate. Actually, I stick with gate because trigger kind of cuts off the transient a lot of the time. Anyways, to get it to play, you need to create a MIDI track or a MIDI clip, which you can do by double clicking in the mixer mode on a MIDI track in one of these little rectangles. So I double clicked there and I got this, which is a blank slate. But it has all the slots in our so these right here are matching up to these right here. So because these are all blank and this has a sample in it, when I look at it over here, these are all blank and this is the only one with the sample in it. Cymatics kick 2. So I'm gonna do the same thing in this editor and put the kick drum down on each quarter note. That's 1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4. So 4 measures per bar, 4 kicks per measure. And then I'm going to turn off this other. Oh, I already did that. Okay. So, ooh, that's way too loud. When you're using the impulse, one really frustrating thing is it's ridiculously loud right off the bat. So I'm almost always playing the volume down a lot. For kicks, I usually leave it at negative 14 dB, which seems extreme, but it's what you got to do to get it to come through at a decent volume instead of incredibly loud. A lot of people just leave it at that insanely loud volume. They don't realize that it's maxing out and their kicks sound terrible. I hear it all the time. Remember, louder is not always better. And if something's not loud enough, how to get it loud enough without just cranking gain, if possible. So here we go. Sounds good. Now, if I click this, change this gate to trigger, it's going to hit a little different. So what I'm actually noticing is the bass transient kind of goes away. All the bass, all the real sub energy from the kick isn't nearly as strong in trigger mode. That result isn't always going to be the case. It probably depends on the kick. Probably for a lot of them it will be like that. But you got to just listen to, you got to A/B stuff and see if it's working or not. If it's taking away from the sound in any way that isn't good. So leave it on gate, in my opinion, because that gives you more of the sound coming through. I usually stick with mode A. I'm not hearing a difference between the two. But so those are the main two ways. You can do the same thing with the simpler. It's basically, I'm not going to go all through it, but I'll just show you that it's possible by throwing a simple in. Oh, if my computer doesn't freeze. Okay, there we go. And then throw the house kick in there. So this is just one sample on this as opposed to the 8 samples that you can have here. And then when you're writing in the simpler, you don't have all these sample slots like you do in the impulse. You just have a piano roll. So you're back on, it's like if you had a regular synthesizer that was playing notes. Oops. It's up way too much. C3 is default. And I don't see how you would know this. There's probably some way to figure it out without me telling you. But C3 is default. So if you want the kick to sound the way it normally does, You got to put it on C3 because if I put it on, it's all low, put it even lower. Boom. So it's not going to sound the same. It's going to be pitched if you don't put it on C3. Put it up higher, it's higher. Anyways, that is the simpler. Notice with the simpler, I didn't have to adjust the volume. It's already at -12, which is nice. It's a decent volume. Okay, so I'm going to stick with the impulse because that's what I usually do. Let's label these just for you guys' sake. Kick, impulse, kick, simpler. Bunch of kicks going on. Okay, great. All right, so now once we've got the kick in and it's kicking at the rhythm we want it to, the best thing to do, well, the best thing to do depends on the track. But the next thing that you want to do is make sure it's sitting in the mix, which even though we don't have a mix or any other instruments to right now, I'm going to show you different things that you can do because this is just a kick video. So we're just going to focus on the kick. But we're going to show you different things that you can do once the kick is in there. So there's all kinds of mixing things that you can do. Everyone does different stuff depending on the track, depending on what their sample source is. I don't tend to do a ton. There's a couple of things that I tend to find myself doing over and over again. One of them is, all right, EQ. And because EQ can solve problems, it can also create problems. But if your kick's not coming through, and I don't find this to be a problem much lately because of the way I compose, but if it's not coming through enough, you basically are going to either boost the sub or the top. It's pretty much always one of those because kick is pretty much just sub and top anyways. You could cut this mid stuff out and people are barely going to notice. Drag this out really long so you can hear it. Mid-range out, and it's making a difference, but it's not ruining the kick. Kick still sounds fine. But if there's not enough thump, just go down here. Just play around with it till it sounds good. Usually you want something below 100 because it's where sub energy is, and sub energy is the energy that you feel more than hear. And if the kick is not thumping, you're not feeling it. Sometimes there's exceptions and you actually really need it to be a little bit higher. That's kind of where the punch is, and the smack is up here. Oh yeah, usually around 2000 or something. Sometimes 1000, depending on what kind of kick style kick you're going for. But for these dance kicks, usually somewhere around here. A lot of the times there's too much of this. And so rather than boosting the bottom to get the bass up or to have it thump more, you just reduce the top like this with a nice high shelf. It's nice and dark. Sounds good. Another thing you can do is you can hard cut off the bottom because there's a lot of frequencies you can't hear down there. That's kind of a nitpicky thing. A lot of people do that at the end of the track and mastering anyways. So it's kind of like, do you really need to do it here? Also, anytime you're cutting something off really sharp with a real, you see how this is angled, like almost a straight 90-degree angle? That's going to emphasize whatever frequency you do it at. So if I'm doing this at 100 is actually going to get a little louder than if it were just like here. You're hearing all the lower stuff, but it's kind of masking 100. And you put it here, and now 100 is emphasized. You put it on 60, 60 is going to be emphasized. You put it on 30, 30 is going to be emphasized. And sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. You can also layer kick drums. So I tend to just use one kick, but if it's just not sounding right and I can't find a kick that sounds right, that's when I'll layer them. And one way to layer them is to just copy your track over and change the sample to, well, basically you want to think of it like one kick's going to have a low end and one kick's going to have a high end. Up layer kick drums. I just put two kick drums down and say, this sounds good together. But I rarely do that because I worry about the exact timing of transients and stuff like that and harmonics and blah, blah, blah. You can freak out about the stuff. My suggestion is just to figure out what sounds good and move forward. Don't think about it too much. But just to show you how to layer kicks if you want, you can just copy it over like this and switch the sample, which would sound like this. I'm just picking a something like that. Okay. Doesn't sound bad, right? Sounds a little money to me. So what I would do about that is see which high end up. Okay, so I like this high end more. That's my opinion for this kick. And so I'm going to cut out the bottom. Ooh, that sounds good. Oh, it sounds really good. And then I'm going to cut the top out of this. That's a good kick. That's a good kick. You could cut. And exactly where you're cutting, that's subjective. You got to just sweep up and down and find the good stuff. But you can leave a bunch of stuff out because this bottom kick that I have right now is only playing up to 230 hertz-ish. And this one is playing 800 and above. So everything between 230 and 830 hertz is pretty much gone. There's not really much kick energy coming there. And this is great because it leaves room for other instruments in your mix, and it just gives you a chance to make the song bigger in general. And it sounds really good. Yeah, it's just clean and it bumps and it sounds great. Okay, you can also compress your kicks. If you're doing something very rhythmic, I strongly recommend it. Again, I don't always do it, but I find that when I'm doing a straight 4 on the 4 track like this one, like boom, boom, it helps a little bit to compress it. And you might want to look up typical kick compressor settings. Everyone's are different. Depends on what you're going for. Let enough of the attack through so that the kick's not being compressed right when it hits. A bass transient takes like 50 milliseconds to even form. So if you want to let the bass, the sub frequency through it all without compressing it, you're probably going to need an attack of at least 30 to 50. I don't know exactly how long it takes, but it takes like at least 30. What up, dude? Are you here? Hold on. Nick, sorry. Sorry, bro. I'm streaming right now. I'm streaming Ableton, how to do a kick drum. I don't think you'd be here yet. I'm almost done though. All right. Huh? All right. Okay. So back to the compressor. So I'm throwing a compressor on. A ratio of 2 is decent. Attack of people usually, I see people do 20 a lot. I think if you were doing RMS means it's not just 20 milliseconds. It's going to be longer than that. It's hard to explain really briefly. Peak's going to be exactly 20 milliseconds. RMS is going to be longer. So if you want a slower attack, slower release, do RMS. But if you want things to be precise, click peak. The release, you need to time out to the beat of the music, basically. And I've seen deadmau5 literally calculate this a lot, and then he'll just put his release there. I'm not sure if that makes sense, because if you are going to calculate, the way he's doing it is he's splitting up the beat, 119 beats per second, into 4. And saying how long does it take for the beat to come back. So for the kick to for how many milliseconds are between the first beat and the second beat and the third beat, and you're basically just trying to time the release to match that exactly. I'm going to get a little advanced here because I'm only compressing this bottom part of the kick. I want to compress both of them together. So I'm going to click both tracks, hold shift and highlight them, and Control G. Now they're grouped, and now I can put one effect on this group and it will affect both sounds at the same time. Just like that. Okay. And I don't want this makeup gain because makeup gain is adding gain to the compression automatically. I want to do that manually. So I'm basically looking for this gain reduction to go back down in the same timing as the beat. So I just like to watch it. And that looks not bad to me. You also need to listen. You can't just look. You got to listen and see, does this sound better like this? Oh, also try to match the gain so that it meets the input gain. And so when you A/B it, you're not claiming something's better. So that's definitely punchier, but less bassy. And so I don't know if I would keep that or not. I would have to listen to it in the context of the track and make my judgment then. But you can see how compression can help or hurt the situation. And you don't have to layer kick drums to do this. You can just put this on a single kick drum if you hadn't layered a kick drum. Like, let's say I was just using my original track like this. Yeah, with these settings, the compression is pretty intense. I might try RMS. There are other ways to compress kicks too. You can get fancy and do multi-band compressors. Sometimes multi-band compressors sound amazing. That actually sounds really tight. That's not going to work. Wow, so that brings it right up to the front with this multi-band compressor. So there's multiple things you can do. But those are the basics of how to get the kick drum out on your track and get your track started, because that's how a lot of people's tracks get started. And tomorrow or the next couple of days, we will continue onto the snare and mixing these two things together. All right. Have a good day, everybody, and I'll see you next time.